The bridge of the Pathfinder hummed with tension as the massive alien ship filled the main view screen. Lieutenant Amy Carter stood at her station, her fingers moving quickly across the controls as she analyzed the vessel's configuration. She had seen ships like this before, but only in her research files. The Kryloth war party had finally found them. Captain Helen Brooks sat in the command chair, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. She had been expecting this encounter for weeks, ever since they entered the disputed territory near the Terminus Nebula. The Kryloth claimed this sector as their hunting grounds, but human explorers had discovered valuable mineral deposits here first. Now diplomacy had reached its end. "They're hailing us, Captain," said the communications officer. "Put them through," Helen replied. The view screen shifted to show the interior of the alien vessel. A massive creature stood in the center of the frame, nearly 8 feet tall with 4 muscular arms crossed over a broad chest. Its skin was dark gray, covered in ritualistic scars, and its eyes glowed with an amber light. This was Korthal, the Kryloth war champion. "Human vessel." The alien's voice rumbled through the speakers, the translation software struggling to convey the depth of his tone. "You trespass on sacred hunting grounds. This territory belongs to the Kryloth Empire. You will surrender your claim and pay reparations, or you will face judgment by combat." Commander Greg Sullivan stepped forward, his chest puffed out. He was a tall man, muscular and confident, with a square jaw and perfectly groomed hair. His uniform displayed multiple medals from his years of service. "Captain, let me handle this," he said loudly. "I've dealt with alien intimidation tactics before." Helen raised a hand to silence him, but Greg continued speaking. "We're not afraid of your challenge," he called out to the screen. "Humans don't back down from threats." Korthal's eyes narrowed. "Then you accept trial by combat? 1 champion from each vessel. The victor claims the territory. This is the old way, the honorable way." Amy felt her heart race. She had studied the Kryloth for 3 years, written 2 papers on their combat rituals, and learned their language through countless hours of practice. She knew exactly what this challenge meant and what it would take to win. More importantly, she knew what would happen if they approached it the wrong way. "Captain," Amy said quietly, stepping toward the command chair, "I need to speak with you about this challenge." Greg turned to her with a dismissive smile. "Lieutenant Carter, I think the adults can handle this. Why don't you get back to your station?" "Commander, with respect, I've studied the Kryloth extensively. Their combat rituals have specific rules and expectations. If we don't approach this correctly—" "I've read your reports," Greg interrupted, waving his hand as if brushing away an insect. "Very interesting academic work. But this isn't a classroom, Lieutenant. This is real combat, and it requires a real warrior." Amy felt her cheeks flush, but she pressed on. "Commander Sullivan, I'm not just talking about academic knowledge. I've trained specifically for situations like this. My background in martial arts and xenobiology." Greg laughed, and several crew members glanced their way. "Martial arts? You mean that dancing you do in the gym? Lieutenant, look at that creature." He gestured to the view screen where Korthal waited patiently. "That thing is 8 feet tall with 4 arms. It's been bred for combat for generations. You think some ancient human fighting techniques are going to help against that?" "The Kryloth respect skill and honor over raw power," Amy insisted. "Their combat philosophy values—" "Philosophy?" Greg's voice rose. "Captain, permission to volunteer as our champion. I've been in real combat situations. I've trained with the best military instructors in the fleet. I'm not going to let a historian playing soldier risk human lives because she's read some books about alien culture." Amy clenched her fists. "Commander, I'm not just—" "That's enough, Lieutenant," Helen said firmly. She looked between Amy and Greg, clearly weighing her options. The whole bridge had gone silent, watching the confrontation. Greg stepped closer to Amy, lowering his voice, but not enough that others couldn't hear. "Look, I know you're proud of your research. It's cute. But you're what, 130 pounds? You barely come up to my shoulder. That alien would break you in half before you could remember which ancient master taught which philosophy." He turned back to the captain. "Let me do what I was trained to do, Captain. I won't let humanity be humiliated by these brutes." Amy opened her mouth to respond, but Helen raised her hand again. "Commander Sullivan, you're volunteering to be our champion." "Yes, Captain. I'll bring honor to the Pathfinder and to humanity." Helen looked at Amy. "Lieutenant Carter, do you have a specific objection to Commander Sullivan representing us?" Amy wanted to scream that she had dozens of objections, that Greg's approach would get him killed. that the Kryloth valued different things than he understood. But she could see the determination in Helen's eyes and knew the captain had already made her decision. Greg was the obvious choice in everyone's eyes. Bigger, stronger, more experienced in traditional combat. "No, Captain," Amy said quietly. "No objection." "Good," Greg said with a satisfied smile. "Don't worry, Lieutenant. When I win, you can write a paper about it." Several crew members chuckled. Helen stood and faced the view screen. "Korthal, we accept your challenge. Commander Greg Sullivan will represent humanity." The alien warrior studied Greg through the screen, his amber eyes unreadable. "Very well. We will establish a combat arena on the neutral asteroid designated 724. In 3 hours, your champion will face me. Come armed as you wish. The combat ends when one warrior can no longer fight or yields. If your champion falls, you will surrender this territory and pay reparations of resources and technology. If I fall, we will withdraw and recognize your claim." "Agreed," Helen said. The transmission ended and the bridge erupted in quiet conversation. Greg immediately began discussing weapon selections with the security chief, his voice full of confidence. Amy returned to her station, her mind racing through everything she knew about Kryloth combat rituals. She had seen recordings of their fights, studied their techniques, understood their philosophy. Greg was walking into a trap of his own making, but no one wanted to listen to her. She pulled up her personal files on the Kryloth, reviewing the combat footage one more time. In every recording, the Kryloth warriors moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for creatures their size. They fought with intelligence and strategy, not just brute force. Their forearms worked in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed opponents who tried to match strength with strength. Amy watched Greg across the bridge, laughing with other officers, already celebrating a victory he hadn't earned. She wanted to warn him again to make him understand, but she knew it was useless. He had made up his mind, and so had everyone else. In their eyes, she was just a young officer with more book knowledge than practical experience. 3 hours later, as the Pathfinder approached the designated asteroid, Amy stood in the observation deck with the rest of the crew. Greg was in the shuttle bay preparing his weapons and armor. He had chosen heavy protective gear and multiple energy weapons, confident that human technology would give him the edge. Amy pressed her hand against the cold glass of the viewport, watching the barren asteroid grow larger. Somewhere in her heart, she hoped she was wrong about what was going to happen next. But deep down, she knew better. Greg Sullivan was about to learn a painful lesson about the difference between confidence and wisdom. She only hoped the price wouldn't be too high for all of them. The asteroid's surface was gray and lifeless, covered in ancient craters and dust that hadn't moved in millions of years. The Kryloth had set up a circular arena marked by glowing energy posts, each one humming with power. The combat zone was roughly 100 feet across, large enough for movement but small enough that neither fighter could easily retreat. Greg Sullivan stepped out of the human shuttle, his armor gleaming under the harsh light of the nearby star. He carried an energy rifle in his hands and had a plasma pistol holstered at his hip. His helmet's display showed him tactical information, weak points in the terrain, and a constant scan of the arena. He felt ready. He felt invincible. The Kryloth shuttle was larger, darker, and looked like it had seen 1,000 battles. When its door opened, Korthal emerged, and Greg felt his confidence waver for just a moment. The alien was even more massive in person, each of his forearms thick with muscle, but he wore only light armor on his chest and legs, leaving much of his scarred skin exposed. He carried no visible weapons. Both crews watched from their respective shuttles, the humans nervous and the Kryloth calm. Amy stood at the window of the human shuttle, her stomach tight with worry. She had tried one more time to speak with Greg before he left the Pathfinder, but he had brushed her off with a patronizing pat on the shoulder and a promise to tell her all about his victory. A Kryloth officer stepped forward, speaking in both languages through a translation device. "The rules are ancient and simple. Fight until one warrior cannot continue or yields. All weapons are permitted. Honor demands courage. May the strongest prevail." Greg raised his rifle, checking the charge one last time. Across the arena, Korthal simply stretched his forearms, each one moving in a different pattern, limbering up like a human athlete before a race. The alien's amber eyes locked onto Greg, studying him with an intensity that made the commander uncomfortable. The signal was given. The combat had begun. Greg immediately opened fire with his energy rifle, sending blue bolts of superheated plasma across the arena. It was a good strategy, or so he thought. Keep the enemy at range. Use superior technology to wear him down, then move in for the finish. He had used this approach successfully in combat simulations and even in 2 real engagements with hostile alien pirates. But Korthal wasn't a pirate. The Kryloth warrior moved with shocking speed, his large body suddenly fluid and graceful. He dodged the first 3 shots, then used 2 of his arms to grab a large rock, hurling it at Greg while his other 2 arms gestured in a complex pattern. Greg fired at the rock, shattering it, but the debris created a dust cloud that momentarily blocked his vision. When the dust cleared, Korthal had closed half the distance between them. Greg backpedaled, firing continuously. Several shots hit the alien's armor, scorching it but not penetrating. Korthal kept coming, moving in a zigzag pattern that made him harder to track. Greg's tactical display was screaming warnings about the target's speed and trajectory, but his body couldn't react fast enough. Then Korthal was on him. The alien's first arm struck the rifle, tearing it from Greg's hands with such force that the commander felt something pop in his shoulder. The second arm caught Greg's reaching hand, twisting it painfully. The third arm slammed into Greg's chest, denting his armor and driving the air from his lungs. The fourth arm was already moving toward Greg's helmet. Greg managed to draw his plasma pistol with his free hand and fired at point-blank range. The shot hit Korthal in the shoulder, burning through the light armor and into flesh. The alien growled in pain but didn't slow down. Instead, he grabbed Greg's wrist with his fourth arm and squeezed. The pistol clattered to the ground as Greg screamed inside his helmet. He tried to break free, using every combat technique he had learned in the military. He threw punches, tried to knee the alien, attempted to headbutt with his armored helmet. But Korthal had 4 arms to Greg's 2, and each of the alien's limbs was stronger than any human's. Korthal lifted Greg off the ground with 2 arms, while the other 2 struck him repeatedly. The armor held for a few blows, then began to crack. Greg's tactical display was flashing red with damage warnings. He could taste blood in his mouth. In the human shuttle, Amy watched in horror. Several crew members gasped or looked away. This wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration of complete dominance. Greg tried one last desperate move, activating his armor's emergency thrusters. The small jets were designed to help with mobility and low gravity, but he used them to try to break free, pushing against Korthal with all his remaining strength. It almost worked. He slipped from 2 of the alien's arms and fell to the ground, his armor's jets dying out. He tried to crawl toward his rifle, lying 10 feet away in the dust. His shoulders screamed with pain and his chest felt like it was on fire, but he was a decorated officer. He wouldn't give up. Korthal let him crawl 5 feet. Then the alien's foot came down on Greg's lower back, pinning him to the ground. The commander struggled, but he couldn't move. He couldn't even lift his head. "You fight with tools, not skill," Korthal said in surprisingly clear English, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "You rely on armor and weapons but do not understand combat. This is why you lose." 2 of Korthal's arms grabbed Greg's legs. Before anyone could react, before Greg could even scream a warning, the alien twisted sharply. The sound of breaking bone echoed across the asteroid. Greg's scream followed, raw and agonized. Both of his legs were broken. Korthal released him and stepped back, watching as Greg collapsed completely, unable to move, tears streaming down his face inside his helmet. The alien hadn't killed him, but he had utterly destroyed him. "Do you yield?" Korthal asked. Greg could barely speak through the pain. I yield." The Kryloth officer stepped forward and declared the combat over. Human medics rushed from the shuttle, carefully lifting Greg onto a stretcher. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. As they carried him past Amy, his eyes met hers for just a moment. There was no arrogance there now, only pain and shame. Amy wanted to feel vindicated, but she only felt sick. She had known this would happen, had tried to warn them, but no one had listened. Now Greg was broken, and humanity's position was worse than ever. Back on the Pathfinder, the mood was grim. Greg was in the medical bay, undergoing emergency treatment for his broken legs and multiple other injuries. The doctor said he would recover physically, but it would take months. His military career might be over. Captain Helen Brooks stood on the bridge, staring at the view screen where Korthal's face once again appeared. The alien warrior had bandaged his shoulder where Greg's pistol had burned him, but otherwise seemed unbothered by the fight. "Your champion has fallen," Korthal said. "By the terms of our agreement, You will now surrender this territory and provide reparations. We will board your vessel in 1 hour to claim what is owed. Helen's jaw tightened. She had been a starship captain for 15 years, had negotiated with dozens of alien species, had faced pirates and natural disasters and impossible odds. But this felt different. This felt like defeat not just for her ship but for her entire species. The Kryloth would tell other races about this encounter, about how easily they had broken humanity's champion. Captain? Amy's voice was quiet but clear. There's another option. Helen turned to look at her. The young lieutenant stood straight, her expression calm despite the tension in the room. What option, Lieutenant? Our champion lost. The combat is over. The combat is over, Amy agreed. But the challenge isn't. The Kryloth have an ancient tradition called the Redemption Challenge. If a champion falls, another can take their place, but only if they invoke the old words. It's rarely used because it's considered extremely dangerous. If the second champion loses, the penalties are doubled. How do you know this? Helen asked. I've studied their culture extensively, Captain. It's in their oldest texts, from before they had spaceflight. The Redemption Challenge was meant to give honorable warriors a chance to save their people even after initial defeat. Helen considered this. And if we invoke this challenge and lose again? Then we don't just surrender the territory. We would become vassals to the Kryloth in this entire sector. Every human ship that passes through would owe them tribute. The bridge went silent. It was an enormous risk, but if we win, Helen asked, then we gain not just the territory but their respect, possibly even an alliance. Amy took a breath. Captain, I request permission to be humanity's second champion. The entire bridge turned to stare at her. Helen's eyes widened. Lieutenant, you saw what just happened to Commander Sullivan. He's twice your size and has years of combat experience. He had the wrong kind of experience, Amy said simply. I have the right kind. I know how they fight. I know how they think. And I know I can win. Helen studied her for a long moment. Amy could see the calculation happening behind the captain's eyes. The captain was weighing an impossible choice. Accept defeat and subjugation, or risk everything on a young officer who had never seen real combat. Finally, Helen spoke. If I allow this and you lose, the consequences will be severe for every human in this sector. I understand, Captain. Can you really defeat that warrior? Amy thought of her grandfather, who had raised her after her parents. The communications channel opened, and Korthal's face appeared on the view screen once more. His amber eyes showed curiosity as he regarded the human bridge crew. He had been expecting a message of surrender, not another transmission so soon after his victory. Human Captain, he said, his tone formal but not unkind. Have you prepared the list of reparations? Captain Helen Brooks stepped forward. Korthal, warrior of the Kryloth, I am not calling to surrender. She gestured to Amy, who moved to stand beside her. This is Lieutenant Amy Carter. She wishes to speak with you. Korthal's eyes shifted to Amy, taking in her small frame and young face. His expression showed confusion, perhaps even concern. In his culture, it was dishonorable to fight those too weak to offer real challenge. Amy took a breath and spoke, not in English, but in the deep, rumbling language of the Kryloth. Her pronunciation was careful and clear. Great warrior Korthal, I invoke the ancient right of Karthesh, the Redemption Challenge. I claim the right to stand as humanity's second champion. The effect on Korthal was immediate. His eyes widened and he leaned forward, studying Amy with new intensity. Behind him, other Kryloth warriors moved into view, speaking rapidly among themselves in their native tongue. You speak the old language, Korthal said, also switching to Kryloth. How does a human know of Karthesh? This tradition is from before your kind reached the stars. Amy continued in his language. I have studied your people with great respect for 3 years. I have read the texts of the warrior poet Thelmar. I have learned the 17 forms of honorable combat. I understand that true strength comes not from size alone, but from understanding and skill. Korthal was quiet for a long moment. Around the bridge, the human crew members looked at each other in confusion. They couldn't understand the conversation, but they could see that something significant was happening. Finally, Korthal spoke again, returning to English so all could hear. Lieutenant Amy Carter, you honor my people by learning our ways. But Karthesh is not a gift. It is a terrible risk. If you fail where your first champion fell, the price doubles. Your people will not just lose territory. They will become subjects to the Kryloth in all of this sector. I understand the terms, Amy replied, also in English now. I accept the risk. And you believe you can succeed where your larger, more armed warrior could not? Amy met his gaze steadily. Commander Sullivan is a brave man and a good soldier, but he fought you the wrong way. He relied on weapons and armor and did not understand what he faced. I will not make his mistake. Korthal studied her silently. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. It was a fierce expression on his alien features, showing sharp teeth, but it seemed genuine. You have courage, small human. Very well. I accept your challenge. We will meet again in the arena in 1 hour. Come prepared, for I will not hold back, even against one so young. I would not want you to, Amy said. The transmission ended. Helen immediately turned to Amy. Are you absolutely certain about this? Yes, Captain. What you did just now, speaking their language, knowing their traditions, they clearly respect that. But respect won't protect you from those 4 arms. Amy smiled slightly. Actually, Captain, respect is exactly what will help me win. The next hour passed in a blur. Amy went to her quarters and changed out of her uniform into simple, flexible clothing. She didn't put on armor. She didn't gather weapons. Instead, she picked up 2 composite batons from her personal training equipment. They were simple things, each about 2 feet long, made of a lightweight but strong polymer. They weren't high-tech energy weapons. They were just well-balanced sticks. Several crew members tried to convince her to take more equipment. The security chief wanted to give her a shield generator. The weapons officer offered her a plasma knife. But Amy refused everything except her 2 batons. When she returned to the shuttle bay, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread through the ship about what was happening. Some looked at her with hope. Others looked at her like she was walking to her death. Captain Helen Brooks met her at the shuttle door. Lieutenant, I need to ask you one more time. Can you really do this? Amy thought about her grandfather again. She remembered being 7 years old, watching him move through kata forms in their small garden. She remembered asking him why he practiced fighting when he was so old. He had knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said something she had never forgotten. Amy, real strength isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about understanding. When you understand your opponent better than they understand themselves, when you see not just what they do but why they do it, then size doesn't matter. Knowledge is the greatest weapon. Her grandfather had died when she was 16, but he had spent those 9 years teaching her everything he knew. 5 martial arts styles, philosophy, history, the importance of respect and discipline, and most importantly, how to learn, how to observe, how to understand. Yes, Captain, Amy said quietly. I can do this. The shuttle ride back to the asteroid felt longer than before. Amy sat alone in the passenger compartment, breathing slowly, centering herself. She ran through mental exercises, visualizing the fight, preparing her body and mind. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. When the shuttle landed and the door opened, Amy stepped out into the harsh light. The Kryloth shuttle was already there, and Korthal stood in the arena, waiting. He had removed the bandage from his shoulder, showing the burn mark from Greg's pistol. It was his way of showing he would hide no weakness. As Amy walked toward the arena, she could see more Kryloth warriors than before. They stood outside their shuttle, watching with intense interest. It wasn't every day that a human not only knew their language but invoked an ancient rite from their most sacred texts. Amy entered the arena circle and stood opposite Korthal. Next to him, she looked absurdly small. The top of her head barely reached his chest. His forearms, each one thicker than both of her legs combined, hung ready at his sides. To anyone watching, it looked like a mismatch even more extreme than Greg's fight. The Kryloth officer stepped forward again. He looked at Amy with something like sympathy. Human warrior, you may still withdraw. There is no shame in recognizing a superior opponent. Amy responded in perfect Kryloth. I thank you for your concern, honored observer. But I came to fight, not to flee. I am ready. A murmur went through the Kryloth warriors. Korthal nodded approvingly. Very well, the officer said. He spoke the old words, the ritual beginning of combat. Amy recognized them from her studies and responded with the appropriate phrase, her pronunciation flawless. The Kryloth warriors' murmurs grew louder. This human truly had studied their ways. Korthal took a combat stance, all 4 arms spreading in a pattern Amy recognized. It was the classical opening form, meant to show respect to a worthy opponent. Despite his earlier victory, despite Amy's small size, he was treating her seriously because she had honored his culture. Amy set her feet and raised her two batons to a ready position. She didn't take an aggressive stance. Instead, she held herself in a neutral posture, balanced and calm. It was a position her grandfather had taught her, one that could respond in any direction without commitment. The signal was given. The combat began. Korthal didn't rush forward as he had with Greg. Instead, he advanced slowly, watching Amy carefully. He had learned to respect her knowledge, even if he doubted her physical ability. He reached out with one arm, testing her reaction. Amy didn't retreat. She moved slightly to the side, her baton tapping against his reaching arm. Not striking hard, but redirecting it gently away from her. It was a small move, almost casual, but Korthal's eyes narrowed. That deflection had been perfectly placed, using his own force against him. He tried again with two arms this time, coming from different angles. Amy moved like water, flowing around the strikes, her batons making small contact with his arms, guiding them past her body. She wasn't blocking his strength with strength. She was simply not being where his strikes wanted her to be. Korthal pulled back and spoke in his language. "You have been taught well, small warrior. But defense alone will not win this fight." "I know," Amy replied, also in Kryloth. "I'm learning your rhythm. Give me a moment more." The honesty of her response made Korthal pause. She wasn't taunting him. She was stating a fact. She was studying him even now in the middle of combat. It was exactly what a true Kryloth warrior would do. He decided to test her more seriously. He came forward with all four arms, a complex pattern of strikes that few beings could defend against. Greg Sullivan had been overwhelmed by this exact combination. Amy's world narrowed to pure focus. She saw each arm moving, calculated each trajectory, found the spaces between the strikes. Her body moved on instinct, developed through thousands of hours of training. She ducked under one arm, sidestepped another, used her baton to deflect a third, and then did something unexpected. She stepped closer to Korthal, moving inside his reach where his long arms couldn't get proper leverage. Her baton struck quickly, precisely, at a point just below his ribs on his left side. Korthal grunted in surprise. That spot, that exact location, was a minor nerve cluster in Kryloth anatomy. It wouldn't seriously hurt him, but it caused a momentary numbness in his lower left arm. She had studied not. The arena had become silent except for the sound of movement and the occasional impact of baton against alien flesh. The watching crews from both species stood transfixed. This was nothing like the brutal beatdown they had witnessed an hour earlier. This was something entirely different. Korthal pressed his attack, trying to use his size and reach advantage to corner Amy against the edge of the arena. His forearms worked in coordination, creating a web of strikes that should have been impossible to escape. But Amy didn't try to escape. Instead, she moved through the gaps in his attack pattern like smoke through fingers. Her grandfather had taught her about flow, about becoming like water that finds its way around any obstacle. He had studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, Wing Chun, and a dozen other styles, taking from each what was useful and discarding what was not. He had taught her that every opponent, no matter how strong, had patterns and rhythms. Find the rhythm, understand it, and you could break it. Amy found Korthal's rhythm. Each time his upper right arm extended for a strike, there was a half-second delay before his lower left arm could follow. It was tiny, almost invisible, but it was there. Each time he put his weight forward on his right leg, his left side became slightly exposed. These weren't flaws exactly. They were just the natural result of having four arms and an enormous body, but they were exploitable. She began to counterattack, not with wild strikes, but with precise, targeted movements. Her baton found another nerve cluster on his right thigh, then another on his left shoulder. Each strike was carefully placed based on the anatomical chart she had studied for hundreds of hours. The Kryloth nervous system was different from a human's, but it still had weak points, places where the right impact could cause temporary numbness or pain. Korthal was starting to feel the effects. His lower left arm was still partially numb from her first strike. Now his right leg was beginning to tingle unpleasantly. These weren't serious injuries, but they were disrupting his coordination. He had fought hundreds of opponents, but none had ever targeted him with such surgical precision. "You study us well," he said in Kryloth, circling her warily now. But knowledge alone will not save you. Knowledge is just the beginning, Amy replied, also circling, her breathing controlled despite her exertion. Understanding comes next. I understand why you fight this way. 4 arms mean more options, but also more to coordinate. Your size gives you power, but makes you work harder to change direction. You fight beautifully, Korthal, but every strength carries a shadow. She was doing something else too, something Greg Sullivan never could have done. She was talking to him in his own language, showing respect even while fighting. In Kryloth culture, combat was not just physical. It was a conversation between warriors. Words mattered. Korthal felt something unexpected, genuine respect for this small human. She had come into his world, learned his ways, and now fought him with honor and intelligence. He decided to honor her in return by fighting at his absolute best. He roared, a deep sound that echoed across the asteroid, and launched into his most advanced attack pattern. All 4 arms moved in a complex sequence called the Storm of Blades, though he carried no blades. It was a legendary Kryloth technique that few could perform and even fewer could survive. Amy saw it coming and felt a moment of fear. She had read about this technique but had never seen it performed. Korthal's 4 arms became a blur of motion, each one following a path that interwove with the others, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of strikes. There was no obvious gap, no clear weakness. But Amy had spent 3 years studying these patterns. Her grandfather had taught her that every complex movement could be broken down into simple components. She didn't try to see the whole storm of blades. Instead, she focused on one arm, just one, and watched where it went. She found the key. In the split second when his upper right arm retracted to gather power for its next strike, there was an opening near his center. It lasted perhaps a quarter of a second, but a quarter of a second was enough. Amy dropped low, almost to the ground, letting 3 of his strikes pass over her. Then she surged forward, moving inside his guard, both batons striking simultaneously. One hit the nerve cluster on his left side that controlled his lower arms. The other struck upward, catching him under the chin, snapping his head back. It wasn't enough to knock him down. Korthal was too strong, too stable for that. But it disrupted his pattern. The storm of blades broke apart, and suddenly his 4 arms were uncoordinated, each one moving independently without the perfect synchronization. Amy didn't let up. She had learned from watching Greg's mistake. When you found an advantage against a stronger opponent, you pressed it. She moved in close, staying inside his reach where his long arms couldn't generate full power. Her batons struck in rapid succession, targeting nerve clusters, pressure points, any weakness her study had revealed. To the watching crews, it looked like a dance. Amy moved constantly, never staying in one place, always flowing around Korthal's attempts to grab her. Her baton seemed to appear from nowhere, striking and withdrawing before he could respond. It was beautiful and terrible to watch. Korthal was breathing hard now, something the watching Kryloth warriors had rarely seen. His arms were responding slowly, the accumulated nerve strikes taking their toll. He had never faced an opponent like this, someone who seemed to know his body better than he did, but he was still standing, still fighting. He changed tactics, abandoning the complex patterns and returning to simple, powerful strikes. If he could just catch her once, wrap one of his massive arms around her small body, it would be over. He began to use his size more deliberately, trying to crowd her, to limit her space to move. Amy felt the change in strategy immediately. The arena suddenly felt smaller. Korthal was using his bulk to control the space, cutting off her angles. This was dangerous. If she let him dictate the terms of the fight, she would lose. She made a decision. Instead of retreating, she attacked. Amy charged directly at Korthal, surprising him. His upper arms reached to grab her, but she dropped and slid between his legs, her baton striking at the backs of his knees as she passed. The nerve clusters there were particularly sensitive in Kryloth anatomy. His legs buckled slightly, not enough to drop him, but enough to throw off his balance. As Amy came up behind him, she spoke in Kryloth. "You asked me earlier if I thought I could win. You want to know why I was so certain?" Korthal turned, his movement still powerful but noticeably slower. "Tell me, small warrior." "Because I don't need to be stronger than you. I just need to be smarter, and I am." It wasn't arrogance in her voice. It was simple truth. "You're a magnificent warrior, Korthal, but you've never fought someone who studied you the way I have." She attacked again, and this time her pattern was different. She had been learning his movements throughout the fight, but now she showed she had learned something else. His timing. She began to move just before he did, anticipating his strikes based on the subtle shifts in his weight and posture. It was like she could read his mind. One of her batons caught him in the shoulder, the same spot Greg's pistol had burned. He growled in pain. Another strike hit a nerve cluster on his neck. His upper right arm went numb. She struck his left thigh, then his right side, then dancing away before he could counter. Korthal was in trouble, and he knew it. 3 of his 4 arms were partially impaired. His legs were starting to feel heavy, but he was a champion of his people, and he would not fall easily. He gathered himself for one final assault, putting everything he had left into a devastating combination. Amy saw it coming. She was exhausted too, her muscles burning, her breathing ragged, but her mind was still sharp. As Korthal launched his final attack, she didn't try to defend. Instead, she used something her grandfather had taught her from his Aikido training. She used his own momentum against him. As his massive body came forward, all his remaining power focused into a crushing blow with his 3 working arms. Amy stepped to the side at the last possible moment. At the same time, she placed one baton behind his forward leg and pushed with the other against his hip. It was a simple technique, basic really, but perfectly timed. Korthal's own force betrayed him. He stumbled off balance, his massive weight working against him. Amy followed up immediately, striking 3 times in rapid succession. Each strike was perfectly placed, hitting the 3 critical nerve points that controlled voluntary movement in the Kryloth species. The great warrior's body locked up. His muscles seized, the nerve impulses disrupted by the precise strikes. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't move his legs. For just a moment, perhaps 5 seconds, he was completely paralyzed. He fell, his huge body crashing to the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. The impact would have killed a human, but Korthal's dense bone structure protected him. He lay there, conscious but unable to move, his amber eyes staring up at the human who stood over him. Amy was breathing hard, sweat dripping down her face. Both her batons were raised, ready to strike again if needed. But she didn't strike. Instead, she did something that shocked both crews. She lowered her batons and performed the Kryloth warrior's salute, a complex gesture with both hands that signified deep respect for a worthy. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched across the asteroid as both crews processed what they had just witnessed. Then, unexpectedly, the Kryloth warriors began to vocalize, a deep thrumming sound that rose from their chests. It wasn't a sound of anger or disappointment. It was their way of showing approval and respect. The Kryloth officer who had overseen the combat stepped forward. His amber eyes studied Amy with newfound appreciation. The combat is concluded. Lieutenant Amy Carter has claimed victory. By the ancient laws of Carthage, humanity retains their claim to this territory. Amy's legs were shaking from exhaustion, but she remained standing. She watched as several Kryloth warriors helped Korthal to his feet. His movements were still slow, his muscles recovering from the nerve strikes, but he was regaining control. When he was finally upright, all 8 feet of him towering over the small human, he looked down at her with an expression that might have been a smile. "You are full of surprises, small warrior," Korthal said in his language. Then, switching to English for the benefit of both crews, he continued. "You have done what few in the galaxy can claim. You have defeated a Kryloth champion through skill and knowledge. I am honored to have faced you." Amy bowed slightly, the way she had learned from her studies. "The honor was mine, great Korthal. You are everything the stories claim and more. Facing you has taught me much." Korthal extended his upper right arm, the traditional gesture of respect among his people. Amy reached up and clasped his massive hand with her own small one. The gesture was symbolic more than functional, but its meaning was clear to every Kryloth watching. This human was worthy. "Your commander who fought first," Korthal said, "he was brave but foolish. He saw me as an enemy to destroy with superior weapons. You saw me as a warrior to understand and respect. That is why he lies broken and you stand victorious. Remember this lesson, Amy Carter." From the human shuttle, Captain Helen Brooks emerged along with several other crew members. They approached the arena cautiously, still not entirely sure what would happen next. The Kryloth warriors parted to let them through, watching the humans with curious eyes. Helen looked at Amy, taking in the younger woman's exhausted face, the sweat-soaked clothes, the slight tremor in her hands that came from pushed muscles and spent adrenaline. "Lieutenant," Helen said quietly. That was the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. Thank you, Captain, Amy replied. I'm just glad it worked. Glad it worked? Helen almost laughed. You defeated a Kreloth war champion. With 2 sticks. You do understand that's going to become legendary, right? Amy hadn't thought about that. She had been so focused on the fight itself, on applying everything she had learned, that she hadn't considered what would come after. Looking around at the faces of her crew, seeing the awe and respect in their eyes, she realized that everything had changed in the last 20 minutes. Korthal spoke again, this time addressing Helen. Captain Brooks, your warrior has earned more than just territory today. She has earned the respect of the Kreloth Empire. We came here expecting to face primitives who relied on technology they barely understood. Instead, we found someone who took the time to truly know us. This is rare in the galaxy. Lieutenant Carter is exceptional, Helen agreed. Indeed. Therefore, I propose more than just a settlement of our territorial dispute. Korthal gestured to the other Kreloth warriors. I propose an alliance. Let our peoples learn from each other. You have technology we respect. You have warriors like Amy Carter who show that humanity has true depth. In return, we can offer protection, trade, and knowledge of this region of space. What say you? Helen glanced at Amy, who gave a small nod. This was more than they had hoped for, more than they had dreamed possible when Greg Sullivan had first volunteered to fight. On behalf of humanity, I accept your proposal. I will need to bring this to our government, of course, but I believe they will be very interested in such an alliance. Excellent. Korthal turned back to Amy. And you, small warrior. The Kreloth have a tradition. When a warrior shows exceptional skill and honor, we offer them a place among us. You would be welcome to train with our champions to learn our ways fully. We in turn would learn from you. What do you say? Amy felt a surge of emotion. This was what she had always wanted, to bridge the gap between species to show that understanding was possible. I would be deeply honored, Korthal. I accept. The Kreloth warriors thrummed again, their sound of approval echoing across the asteroid. The Kreloth officer stepped forward with a small object in his hand, a metal disc engraved with complex symbols. This is a token of honor from our people. Wear it and all Kreloth will know you as a respected warrior. Amy took the disc carefully. It was heavier than it looked, warm to the touch. She attached it to her belt, where it hung like a badge of honor. Then, because she couldn't help herself, she asked in Kreloth, May I ask you something, Korthal? Of course. When I struck your nerve clusters, you could have adjusted your stance to protect them better. Why didn't you? Korthal's laugh was like rolling thunder. Because I wanted to see how far you would take your advantage. A true warrior must be willing to take risks to truly test their opponent. You did not disappoint. The 2 groups began to move back toward their respective shuttles. There was still much to discuss, treaties to write, governments to consult. But the hard part was done. Understanding had been reached, not through weapons or threats, but through respect and skill. As Amy walked back to the human shuttle, several crew members approached her. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others just wanted to be near her, to be part of the story. Amy accepted their congratulations graciously, but her mind was already turning to other thoughts. She needed to check on Greg Sullivan. Back aboard the Pathfinder, Amy went straight to the medical bay. Greg was lying on a bed, his legs encased in regeneration units that glowed with soft blue light. His face was pale and pain medication had left him groggy, but he was conscious. When he saw Amy enter, his expression went through several changes. Shame, anger, resignation, and finally grudging respect. You won, he said simply. I did. Amy pulled up a chair and sat beside his bed. How are you feeling? Like I got my legs broken by an alien warrior. He paused. And my pride broken by being right and wrong at the same time. How do you mean? Greg sighed. I was right that it was a dangerous fight requiring a trained warrior. I was wrong about what kind of training mattered. You tried to tell me and I didn't listen. I mocked you. He looked at her directly. I'm sorry, Amy. You were the better choice from the start and I was too arrogant to see it. Amy appreciated the apology. It couldn't have been easy for him to give. You fought bravely, Greg. You just fought the wrong way. Korthal is an incredible warrior. It's not a shame to lose to him. But you beat him. I beat him because I spent 3 years preparing for exactly that kind of fight. You had different training for different situations. We're both good at what we do. They're just different things. Greg was quiet for a moment. The doctors say I'll be walking again in about 4 months. Another 2 months of physical therapy after that. He looked at his legs in their regeneration units. I've been thinking about what to do during my recovery. Oh? I want you to teach me. Not just the fighting stuff, though, that too. But the other part. The studying, the understanding. I've been a soldier my whole life, Amy. I know tactics and weapons and military history, but I never thought about really learning about the aliens we encounter. I treated them like problems to solve with force. He met her eyes. I want to be better than that, Amy smiled. I'd be happy to teach you. But I warn you, it's a lot of reading. I can handle reading. I went to the academy, you know. He smiled back, then grew serious again. You know the whole ship is talking about you, right? The command staff is already discussing a promotion. There's talk of you becoming a tactical advisor for first contact situations. I just wanted to help, Amy said. I didn't do this for recognition, I know. That's probably why you deserve it. Greg shifted slightly in his bed. Can I ask you something? When you were out there fighting that monster, were you scared? Amy considered the question honestly. Yes, terrified actually. But my grandfather taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. Understanding Korthal didn't make him less scary. It just gave me the tools to face him. Your grandfather sounds like he was a wise man. He was the best. Amy stood up. I should let you rest. The doctor said you need sleep for the regeneration to work properly. Amy? Greg called as she reached the door. Thank you. For winning. For saving us all. And for not rubbing it in my face that you were right. We're on the same side, Greg. We always were. Get some rest. Amy left the medical bay and made her way through the ship. Everywhere she went, crew members stopped to congratulate her or simply stare in awe. It was overwhelming. She had never wanted to be famous or celebrated. She had just wanted to prove that understanding and respect could win where violence failed. She finally made it to her quarters and collapsed on her bed. Every muscle in her body ached. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her feeling hollowed out and exhausted. But it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing something important, something meaningful.